every child can become like Parikshit. Now the child may not be fortunate to see the Lord within the womb of his mother, right? But yet he can become one if he simply reads about Parikshit Maharaj, right? So in other words, when they read about Dhruva Maharaj, when they read about Prahlad Maharaj, they actually imbibe these qualities. It's not something, okay, I just heard about it, there's a plot and this is what happened, and it's just like any other story. So what happens is, and then as they get older, then they actually start following the instructions. And we have so many stories like that. And each story is focusing on one or two particular areas, which is more emphasized. And it's done again and again and again, re-emphasized again and again, but in a way which is very, very interesting. So just to give you a little summary of the effect of Bhagavatam, of reading Srimad Bhagavatam with our children, is that in 6 or 7 years that I homeschooled them, their vocabulary was able to be master's level. And it was just like what Prabhupada said, master's and PhD level, right? And they were able to imbibe all these, in other words, they were able to actually go to college. So this is the effect of Bhagavatam, that they were able to not only get spiritual benefit, but also academic benefit. In other words, our goal is to make our children pure devotees, right? So that is the ultimate goal. But we should not think that there's anything lacking. In other words, both academically and spiritually, one can be at the very top.
So regarding the academic benefits of reading Srimad Bhagavatam, my older brother is 2 years older than me. And so he, growing up, we had a nice temple in Boise. My parents were starting out this temple, which started first from their garage. Like we do here also, they converted their garage into a large space, and that became the temple room. And so as my mother started homeschooling my brother, then they were doing Srimad Bhagavatam at home. And as they did Srimad Bhagavatam at home, like my mother was describing, the vocabulary and reading comprehension, this became very strong. So in academics, one of the hardest areas that they have to teach students is reading comprehension. So it's okay, you can read something and you can maybe comprehend something, but to read something and then to understand it, to discuss it, this is very difficult. And so the process is that by reading the verses and reading Srimad Bhagavatam, one gradually develops these critical thinking skills. Because Srila Prabhupada, he's all about critical thinking. Right? He doesn't tell us to accept anything on blind faith. There'll be a verse and then Srila Prabhupada will explain, why does that verse make sense? What is the reasoning behind it? And this is why Srila Prabhupada's books are so widely accepted, so powerful. Because he doesn't want us to accept anything on blind faith, simply on very good reasoning, thorough reasoning. So going through this process of reading the verse and then reading the purport and thinking about it develops these critical reasoning skills. Furthermore, it increases our vocabulary and also gives us very good communication skills because of the vocabulary that Srila Prabhupada uses. It's interesting that Prabhupada's vocabulary is now like college level vocabulary. I have college level students who I give them sometimes like a chapter from Prabhupada's books or a small Prabhupada's books, and they're not able to understand it. Some of the words are too difficult for them. They're unable to read it. So if our devotee children are able to read those verses and the translations of them, then their vocabulary is better than many college students today. I practically seen that. So when he was about 12 years old, he had started once in a while giving classes at the Sunday program. So he would, we had a smaller congregation. It wasn't like a large temple like Seattle. And it was, sort of out of our home. So on Sundays, he would give the lecture sometimes. So there was a English professor. He was the chair of the English department. His name was Dr. Sahani. And he would come to the Sunday program every week. And once in a while, he listened to my brother's class. At that time, again, he was 12 years old giving the Sunday class. And after listening to the class, he was so impressed by the content, that how nice this content was. That was straight from Srila Prabhupada's books. But also he was so impressed by my brother's vocabulary and his way of presenting it and the reasoning behind it, that after a few Sunday programs, he went up to my mother and father and he made a suggestion. He said that, your son Ravi, at that time my brother's name was Ravi, now he's Radhika Raman, his English and comprehension is so good. I was thinking, why don't you enroll him in a few classes at the university, in just one class at the university, an English class, because his skills are so good. By taking a college class, it'll help him even more. So he was the chair of the English department at Boise State University. It has about 15,000 students. So he was very, in tune with what college is and the college level, but he made this suggestion. And actually before this time, my parents didn't have the idea to put him into college. I mean, who would have the wild idea to put a 12 or 13-year-old into college? So it came from him. And so they thought, okay, well, my mother was homeschooling at that time. Quite a few things were going on, the temple. And so they thought, okay, let's try this. It'll be a nice option. So time came to enroll for the English class. And the idea was that he would enroll for English 101. But by the time he enrolled for it, obviously he needed special permission from the chair, from Dr. Sahani. By the time he enrolled for it, all the section 101 classes were full. So then he thought, well, let's try section 111, which is the honors for 101. That was also full. So then they tried 102, English 102. That was also full. So then they tried English 112, which is the honors level for the second semester English class. And that was the only one that was available. And so my brother and, naturally my parents were a little hesitant to get him enrolled in this. But Dr. Sani said, no, just get him enrolled in this. This will be fine. There was another professor teaching it. He said, I'll sign him off. And so he enrolled in it, not knowing what to expect or how it would go. So in this honors class, one of the first books that he had was like Shakespeare. Another one was like Plato, Socrates. They're reading all of these English classics and very difficult authors, very difficult, authors that he had never read before. So upon seeing this, we were naturally, genuinely a little bit afraid. And my brother was feeling a little overwhelmed, never heard these authors and who they are and what it is. But after he started reading it, he could realize that actually this was not very difficult material. Compared to Srimad Bhagavatam and Prabhupada's books, the ideas and the concepts that they were speaking of were actually very rudimentary, very simple. Like in one of the texts, like in Plato, my brother recalls they were talking about how the person, the self, might be different than the body. And the students were thinking, wow, this is deep. This is really deep. And this is just like, 101 in Srila Prabhupada's books, right? The bread and butter of Srila Prabhupada. You're not this body, you're the spirit soul. But, for the rest of the world, these ideas are so deep. And Srila Prabhupada, he's going in such deep subject matters that 12-year-olds or 13-year-olds never even think about in their life. Right? Most 12 and 13-year-olds at school are reading the Hardy Boys or maybe Sherlock Holmes and just some, novels, fiction. They never think about the meaning of life, the bigger questions about life. And Shakespeare and all of these great authors in the Western world, they're just starting to discuss about these things. Just touch upon what is the meaning of life, what might be the purpose of life, who are we? And Srila Prabhupada has already discussed these in such in-depth. So as he took the course, the professor, her name was Professor Heather something, I forget her full name, but she loved my brother's papers. She found them so nice. My brother loved the class also. He was totally into it. Gradually, as the class progressed, he started getting straight A's. And at the end, he got an A in the class. So all of this, we could understand, was the direct effect of Srila Prabhupada's books, and particularly the Srimad Bhagavatam. And so Prabhupada's words here, where he says that reading Srimad Bhagavatam is more than MA, PhD, it's actually true. It's not just theory. He's not just a good author trying to endorse his books. It's actually very true. And we see this at every level in anyone's. In my own experience, when I first did electrical engineering, but then after that I went for a PhD in religion. I followed in my brother's footsteps. What else can you do, right? So first I did what every good Indian boy should do. I went into electrical engineering. And then I did, then I followed in my brother's footsteps. And so when I went for my PhD, it was interesting that many people, they say that after, like students who go and study religion, after they're done studying religion, generally they'll become an atheist. This is actually a fact. Like if they study religion for a long enough time, then they think, it's all man-made and it's all, it's just a fact. Most religion professors or students, after studying religion, they'll become an atheist. So I was also a little worried about this, that I'm studying religion, I might turn out to be an atheist after I study the world's religions. But actually, my experience was exactly the opposite, which is the experience of some people. I'm not alone in that, but it was the opposite. That after studying the world's religions, my faith in my own tradition, in Krishna consciousness, in Srila Prabhupada's books, it actually deepened. Because I could understand Prabhupada's philosophy is so broad, so accepting, right? The Bhagavatam is so broad that I could understand that how all of these religions, like the Bhagavatam says, they're all different strands of the same truth, right? They're part of the same sunlight, they're rays of light, a part of the same sun, trying to reach God in different ways. But how I could also appreciate that how their knowledge was so much more limited than what the Bhagavatam was offering. Right? So we studied Christianity. In Christianity, Jesus says, I'm not telling you everything that I know. There's so much more that is there. So he told us about God, but he didn't give us detailed descriptions about who God is. How does God look? What is his beautiful, abode? So he gave us knowledge, but it was incomplete. But it's the same knowledge. And then we studied Buddhism, the Chinese traditions, Confucianism, Taoism, Islam. And again, the more you study it, actually you feel that, actually, so many people in this world believe in God. And it's so rich. This knowledge is so rich, but they're just appreciating it in different ways. And the Bhagavatam says, one very beautiful verse in the Bhagavatam, it says that the Bhagavatam sees truth everywhere. There's truth in all the world's religions. There's truth everywhere. But what the Bhagavatam presents is the most complete form of truth. Right? The most nigamakalpatarur galitam phalam, the ripened fruit of all truth. Right? The most complete form of these small aspects of truth that you find in different places in the world. So by reading Srimad Bhagavatam, we get the big picture. We get the big picture. And in one purport, Srila Prabhupada, therefore, he says, and this is rightfully so, he says that if you read the Srimad Bhagavatam, this is in the second canto, he says, you will understand every psychological situation in the world. If you read Srimad Bhagavatam, you will understand every psychological situation in the world. Why is this? Because if you read Srimad Bhagavatam, you'll see that how the Bhagavatam has stories of people in every different situation. Right? Every possible family or human or social situation is presented there in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And then you see how these great devotees are responding to those particular situations. Right? And we will naturally go through this, but Dhruva Maharaj is dealing with a very difficult family situation with family competition, favoritism. And then Sati and Daksha is another situation about a lady, a wife, who's dealing with a very difficult father. So like this, all the human situations are presented in the Srimad Bhagavatam, and by reading Srimad Bhagavatam, if we're feeling confused, like children often do and adults do as well, then we can understand every psychological situation in the world. And it can help us respond to those. So the spiritual benefits we will talk about more next thing. But in terms of the academic benefits, this is the academic benefit of reading Srimad Bhagavatam. That if we read, we get very good English skills, but we also get a very deep and critical mind by which we can understand other philosophies, other literatures, and actually be ahead of the other students.
Another point is that the knowledge in the Srimad Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita is not dogmatic. In other words, it's not making you a fanatic. It's not trying to make you think in a certain way. It's, for example, in the Gita, Arjuna is asking a lot of questions, and and when he doesn't understand, he asks Krishna again and again. It's not like he's saying that. Krishna is saying that you listen to what I'm saying and that's it, there's no more to that. No, Arjuna is saying that Krishna, your instructions are very equivocal. You say something and then you say something and then you change it. For example, you're asking me to take sannyas, but then you're asking me to act. And this question he asks 3 times in 3 different chapters. Why? Because Arjuna is thinking. He's questioning. So in other words, when we read the Gita and we read the Srimad Bhagavatam, we worship Krishna by intelligence. And if it was very beneficial for Arjuna, you can imagine how beneficial it is for us. In other words, it's not trying to mold us into one particular way of thinking. It's actually opening our minds. What it does is actually makes you a more tolerant person. It makes you more tolerant of other people, other religions. Unlike other religions sometimes you hear about, right? They're just like thinking in one way, and if you're not thinking their way, then there's all kinds of problems, right? The Vedas, in particular the Srimad Bhagavatam, is not trying to mold us into that way. It's actually opening our minds to see the bigger picture and how everybody is so wonderful. Srimad Bhagavatam can fit everybody in that. In other words, no matter whatever level we are at, we can actually relate with it. If we have material desires, we can still relate with Srimad Bhagavatam. Dhruva had material desires, right? It's not like, okay, because Bhagavatam is so pure, so it doesn't deal with anybody like us. It does. Because Indra, look at Indra, he's making all these, he's making all these problems, right? He's making all these mistakes again and again. He's got so many material desires. And even story of Kardam Muni, even he was such a great sage, but he owned up with Krishna. Krishna, I have a material desire. I want a wife, right? But then, so everybody can relate with Srimad Bhagavatam. But what the outcome is pure love of God. Now that is not necessarily true of every religion. In other words, Bhagavatam doesn't deal with sub-religious principles. It takes you at the highest level. But then it's a process that one can find in their own way. Wherever they are at, they can gradually make progress. That's why it appeals to all types of people, and it accommodates everyone, yet giving us that real picture of, okay, well, this is the material world, this is how it is. Your goal should be to come back to me. And Krishna, in order to do that, he's so compassionate, he will again and again give so many pastimes by which we can get that point across. So it's very, very accommodating, and it's very, very universal. The other thing is that, like he said, there's actually academically there's nothing lacking. It is said that in America, if you want to become a lawyer, okay, one of the best degrees colleges look for is a degree in philosophy. Why? Because it's not about the content of philosophy, but it's about the skills that are needed to reach philosophical solutions. That is very valuable. And there's so much of that in Srimad Bhagavatam. So in other words, just any area that we want to go into, a study of Srimad Bhagavatam is simply going to encourage that child to do better in that area. Whether they're just trying to be a simple housewife or just a nice grihastha, or they want to be somebody, a great have a wonderful career. No matter what varna or ashram we have, Srimad Bhagavatam is only going to make that person very capable in that. Okay, one doesn't need to be, it doesn't mean that if one's studying Srimad Bhagavatam, one just end up, being a pujari or some kind of preacher, which is really wonderful, right? But it's not that, because it's meant for the very intelligent. The Paramahansas is giving the topmost knowledge. So academically, Gopal will get more into it, but through examples. But I was thinking of when I was teaching the children, how much I found in Srimad Bhagavatam. Like I may have mentioned yesterday, how when I was studying these books with them, I had never studied myself before. I was a fairly new devotee. So when I opened these books, I was also reading for the first time. So what was interesting is that as they were growing spiritually, I was also growing spiritually. But one thing I noticed, that after studying these books, that 1 or 2 hours every day, the mood was just becoming very nice, and they were feeling more and more happy, and I was getting more and more satisfied with the whole process of home education. Why? Because it was created in all these wonderful, actually children become very saintly, even though they're still naughty, but in a transcendental way. It's not really heavy naughty. So anyway, but then as I wanted to teach them, I thought, okay, I'll just teach English through Srimad Bhagavatam. In other words, cover all the language arts. And then for science, I will teach them math. So math becomes the basis for all science, and English becomes the basis for all humanities. And the language and the English I wanted to teach through Srimad Bhagavatam. Now Srimad Bhagavatam, like Prabhupada is saying, is masters and PhD. And we see that, for example, in Srimad Bhagavatam, all the different, if you study what the curriculum is for schools, for language arts, they have to incorporate all kinds of things, right? At some point, children have to study things like what is an analogy, what is a metaphor, what is a simile, right? And there's so much of that in Srimad Bhagavatam. And it can be taught to them at different levels. For example, an analogy is something, it means similarities between two things, okay? So at a very basic level, Prabhupada explains the difference between the body and soul. That's called analogy. In other words, when it is compared to an analogy of the car and the driver. The car and the driver, right? So in other words, you're comparing the body and the soul with the car and the driver. Right? So in a very simple way, Prabhupada explains these very difficult spiritual concepts through these examples. Okay, so the child, starts thinking. I remember teaching my children, and they would start thinking, "Wow, okay, body, soul, car, driver." You know how your mind is trying to analyze, make comparisons through these examples, and they get more and more difficult as children get older. So you can give them the very simple ones, and help them understand. And as they get older, they become more and more complex. Right? For example, Prabhupada used to use the analogy of the, to explain why animals have souls, whether animals have souls or not. And then he explains that through the process of, animal eats, you eat. They sleep, you eat. They have children, you have children, right? So why do you deny that animals don't have souls? That's not logic. That's not, it doesn't make sense. So in this way, he would use all these comparisons and these ways to teach us, to make us understand spiritual concepts. Because as long as we are in this material mode of thinking, it's very difficult to understand spiritual concepts. Okay? So the idea for us was that to understand these concepts, but not through material means, not through material books, where the facts are changing every day, right? What you're studying today, 20 years from now, is going to be useless. 10 years from now, maybe even less, right? Is going to be useless. So there's no use bombarding the children with a whole bunch of material facts. I remember growing up in India and how I had to do so much of general knowledge things. Memorize all these different general knowledge facts, like so much memorization, right? But all that has become quite useless. I mean, geography, things have changed, everything has changed so much, right? So just to fill up the children's mind with all these extra facts is no use. So we teach them these skills, but the facts we use Srila Prabhupada's books. In other words, all these skills that primary school teachers are trying to inculcate in these children, they are actually doing nowadays through concepts, through skills. Because they also recognize that the facts will change, so they want to simply teach them the concepts. Our method as devotees is that we teach them the concepts, but through spiritual books, which are never changing. So this is the idea, is all these things that we are learning in school can all be accommodated just simply by reading Srila Prabhupada. Now all these ideas of what was happening, the benefits came later to me. At that time I was just simply doing Srimad Bhagavatam. But then later on when I saw the result where they could talk convincingly with people, their logic, their thinking, their reasoning, their communication skills, then it dawned on me what Srimad Bhagavatam has done for the children. It's not like I started out thinking like this, Okay? So that's why it's such a wonderful book to teach from. So I thought I'll talk a little bit about that. And then, of course, the question is it practical? Do you want to talk about that? So is it practical? It is very much practical. Like I said, it is something that can be valuable in everyday life. Like Gopal said, in terms of our interpersonal relationship with each other, with other people in the society, as well as in our relationship with devotees, it deals with so much of those. In these stories, deal with that.
So, if we can go one slide before, yes, that's academic, and then spiritual benefits. Good. That one's missing, maybe there. There we go. Yes. Okay, thank you. So, we talked about the academic benefits of reading Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, there's also many spiritual benefits. And the spiritual benefit of reading Srimad Bhagavatam is that we get good role models, we get direct association with great personalities, we imbibe the character of these personalities, and we appreciate their instructions. So like my mother was saying, that by reading the Srimad Bhagavatam, we get the qualities, or we gradually get the qualities of the people who we are reading about. And we imbibe their character, their example, by reading about them. So I wanted to give a small example of this, which is the story of Dhruva Maharaj. And how the story of Dhruva Maharaj is such a wonderful example, just one story that shows how it can have such a powerful effect. So the idea being that we all need to read, right? Students need to read in order to improve their English skills. They have to read some book. So academically it's necessary to read. But if they read Srimad Bhagavatam, not only do they read, but they also get this spiritual benefit, sort of internal benefit within their heart. So we all know the story of Dhruva Maharaj, right? Dhruva Maharaj is the son of Suniti, and his stepbrother is Uttam. And one time Uttam and Dhruva, they were playing in the palace of their father, in the palace room of their father. And they're playing in front of their father, and at a certain point they get tired after playing, so Uttam grabs onto his father's dhoti, and his father immediately puts him on his lap. He sits on his father's lap. Now Dhruva also wants to sit on his father's lap, so he goes. At that time he's just a 5-year-old boy, Uttam and Dhruva. And they're just 5-year-old boys playing there. So he also goes to his father and wants to sit on his lap. However, when he goes there, then his father does not give the same support for him to sit on his lap in the same way that he gave to Uttam. And that's because Uttanapad, his father, had 2 wives. One was Suniti, who's the mother of Dhruva, and the other is Surichi, who's the mother of Uttanapad. And Surichi was a favorite wife of the king. At that time, Surichi was standing next to him. So in order to show favor to his wife Surichi, King Uttanapad does not, in front of her, put Dhruva on his lap. Rather, he puts Uttam, the son of Surichi, on his lap. So when Dhruva sees this, his heart sinks. And at that moment, Surichi, taking advantage of the situation and seeing how the king was openly giving her preference and her son preference, she speaks some very cruel words to Dhruva. And she tells Dhruva that how you are actually born in the womb of an unfortunate woman, because I am the favorite wife of the king. And in this life, she tells him, you cannot sit on the throne, you cannot sit on the lap of your father, which means that you cannot be king. But rather, if you at all desire to sit on the throne, then you must die. You must perform austerities in this life, and then you must die. And if you're fortunate, then in your next life, you can take birth from my womb, and then you can sit on your father's lap. And so she says these very, very cruel words to Dhruva. And Dhruva, being very hurt, it said that, words from an outsider, they also, from someone, a stranger, hurt the person's heart. But words from a family member, someone close to you, go very deep into the heart. So Dhruva, his heart being pierced by her sharp words, his eyes start to burn and his tears come down his eyes, and he goes crying to his mother. Now, most of us have heard the story of Dhruva, and Dhruva's like this nice, simple story known, like a fable, that it's a child who wants the pole star and these things. But the part that we miss is that in this very story, there's some very deep instructions that are given. That the Bhagavatam just doesn't give the story, but also gives very deep instructions. So when Dhruva goes to his mother, Suniti, that his mother sees that her son is crying, and the palace attendants tell Dhruva, his mother, why he is crying. They tell, bring her up to date, what happened, the details of it. So after hearing that, she also starts to cry. And tears start to come down her eyes as well. And then after that, she collects herself and she tells Dhruva, she tells him that actually the words of your stepmother are correct. She says that you are actually born from the womb of an unfortunate woman, because I am actually the less favorite wife of the king. And so in this situation, I cannot help you. And in fact, no one can help you. Why can anyone not help Dhruva in this situation? Because his father is the emperor of the world, right? His father is the emperor of the world. And so he's the most powerful person there. Who can help in such a situation? It's like, if there's a problem with someone, you go to someone who's more powerful than that person to solve your problem. But he's the most powerful person in the world. So she says, factually speaking, no one can help you except for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So your stepmother's words also that you should go and perform austerities and find the Supreme Lord is also correct. So therefore, in this situation, I tell you that you should go and find the Supreme Lord. And she says that I've heard that he is found in the forest. So go to the forest, and there the sages, they may help you find the Supreme Lord. But then she gives a very important instruction to Dhruva. She tells him that it's very nice that you're going, but before you go, first of all, give up your envy for your brother Uttama and for your stepmother Surichi. Give up your envy in your heart for them. And then go out and find the Supreme Lord. Now, why does Surichi tell Dhruva to give up her envy? I mean, at the end of the day, Surichi was envious of Dhruva. Right? Dhruva had the right to sit on his father's lap. But why is she telling him that you give up your envy? He won't be able to find the Supreme Lord, but someone could say that he wasn't envious of her to begin with. Louder? It would purify his heart, right? But actually, he was envious. Sometimes we think that the world is envious of us, but we are also envious if we are experiencing those feelings. Why? Because she said that give up your anger towards Surichi and Uttama. Anger is a sign of envy. When we're envious of someone, then we become angry. It's sort of a result of it. So she says, give up your anger towards them, because you are feeling that a great injustice has happened to you, that they have been unjust with you or envious of you. But she says, but actually in this world is perfectly just. Actually in this world, no one attains anything in this world unless they have pleased the Lord. She says there's no reason to be angry with your stepmother and stepbrother, because anyone who attains anything in this world attains it because they have pleased the Lord. Your great-grandfather Brahma became the creator of this universe. Why? Because he pleased the Lord. Your grandfather Swayambhuva Manu became Manu, the father of mankind, because he pleased the Lord. Your father became the emperor of the world, Uttanapad. Why? Because he pleased the Lord. So if you also please the Lord, you will also gain your heart's desire. So therefore, the solution to your anger and your envy towards your stepmother is not to be angry or envious of them, but to go out and to please the Lord. Because if anyone gains anything in this world, it's because at a certain point they please the Lord. If anyone loses anything or wants something, then the solution is that they also must please the Lord. So in this way, you can give up your envy towards your stepbrother. You're thinking your stepbrother is more fortunate because he's born of my stepwife, and the stepwife, Surichi, is more dear to the king. Right? You are envious of your stepbrother. But if you understand that actually they please the Lord and you did not, then you can give up that envy. So then after that, Dhruva gives up the anger and envy that he has towards his stepmother and brother, and he goes to the forest, and there he meets Narad Muni. And there, after 6 months, only 6 months, he finds the Supreme Lord, and he sees him face to face. So this narration has a very important message that personally growing up also, I found to be very instructive to me, and which I also try to apply many times in my own life. Because I also had a brother, right? We were two brothers, and it's natural when there's two brothers, there'll be feelings of competition or envy or jealousy. And when those things would come, then I would actually think of this story, and I think, see, Dhruva Maharaj, he received this instruction, that if I want something in this world, right? Such a nice instruction in the Bhagavatam is there, that in mature life, we judge our success upon the failure of others. And that's what Dhruva is hoping for, that I'm gonna show, my stepmother and brother, who's the best person here. I'm gonna pull them down. I'm going to burn them with my anger, right? So in mature life, we judge our success based upon the failure of others. But in spiritual life, we will be successful based upon our own success in serving the Lord, in pleasing the Lord. So I would think, I just have to please the Lord. I haven't pleased the Lord. Therefore, I'm feeling in this way. I'm feeling less or like this. So all of these problems of competition, or which are natural human things between children, can be solved simply by this one narration of Dhruva Maharaj. And this is one example of how a psychological situation, a social situation, a social problem can be solved through the message of the Bhagavatam. So not only do we read the Dhruva story, only do we get vocabulary, comprehension, critical thinking skills, but by reading the Dhruva story, we also gain great life lessons. Lessons in life that we can always apply as a child or even as an adult. Yes. Yes. So they are not pure devotees, right? The Bhagavatam does not say that they were very advanced or pure devotees. In fact, later on, they realize their mistake. But they're in a materially fortunate situation because at some point in time, they please the Lord. Yes. So their situation is pleasing. They had good karma. They please the Lord due to their service to the Lord or their piety. Therefore, they're in a situation. And we find this many times in the world. This is why the devotee actually respects anyone in positions of power or leadership. Even if they're not so perfect, he still respects those positions because he sees the Lord's blessing is there, therefore they are there. Just like our own Donald Trump, right? He's not the best president, all these things, but a devotee will still respect that position and that person, not because he agrees with everything that they're doing. In fact, they may disagree, but they'll still respect it because at some point he pleased the Lord. That's why he was so lucky to be in the powerful position that he is. And in fact, there's also some speculation that he pleased the Lord because he arranged for the Rath Yatra in New York City. He provided the land there for the carts to be built. So who knows? When my own Guru Maharaj heard that, then he said, "Oh, that's why he became president." No doubt.
And it's such a nice thing, because when we can resolve so many things, so many of our own envy and jealousy through these, when we actually accept this, somebody's opulence as being Krishna's vibhuti, rather than something that we need to compete with and feel jealous about, right? And in this Dhruva story, like he's saying so many things in terms of character building. He's talking about the spiritual benefit, the character building is all there, because the quality of gratefulness, for example, is very much clearly shown in Dhruva's story. How he was grateful to his mother, even after 36,000 years. Now, when the time came for him to go back to Godhead, when he had finished his austerity after his kingship for 36,000 years, and it was time for him to go back to Godhead, he would not board the plane, right? We know that story. And then Nanda and Sunanda asked him, "What is the matter?" And he says, "Well, I can't leave my mother behind." And then he looked up, and his mother was already leaving. So something that happened 36,000 years ago, he remembered. Just that one exchange which lasted for 2 or 3 minutes, he remembered that, and he was grateful about it. He saw her as, Pad Pradaksha Guru, his first Guru. So again, this quality of gratefulness which comes through in Dhruva's story, you cannot teach a child that quality, in any other way. For example, you sit down with the child and say, why you do this or you do that. I remember when I was young, I went to a convent, and we had this moral science class. That was the first class, right? And they would teach us all these principles. It was a Christian school, and they would teach, honor their mother and father, love your neighbor, all these things. And it was one of those classes children never wanted to go through. It's like, okay, we've got to get through with this, because it doesn't register. These are all things that we are being pointed at. You're like that. We can go and tell the children, you should be grateful to all I've done. How come you don't respect me, right? It doesn't come to them. It's just the opposite, right? But when you do it through these stories, it really, it affects them, because they understand, through the other example, rather than pointing a finger at them or giving them these theoretical principles. So automatically there's qualities like that being developed. In other words, the parents have their duty towards the children, but what is the duty of the children towards the parents? Right? That also comes very clearly through that. How Kapila Muni, he liberated his mother. The duty of a son is to actually take his parents back to Godhead, which is a very serious duty. And the parent's duty is to actually, he shouldn't even become a parent if he cannot guarantee that the children will go back to Godhead. Right? So both ways, it's a very nice balance which comes through in Srimad Bhagavatam. So,
Yes, this point of gratefulness is very nice. By reading Srimad Bhagavatam, on many stories we find this coming through. The story of Prahlad, the story of Dhruva. And you find actually that how, in our modern world, that how ungratefulness is such a big problem. Right? That children, they're ungrateful towards their parents, even if their parents make one mistake, and they always blame them or something like this. This tendency of blaming. And how Dhruva, there's so many lessons in his life. This was one lesson which I mentioned, but like my mother is saying, gratefulness is another example. And then also when he goes back, then his father is lamenting for his mistake the entire time. And through that process of lamentation, his father sort of atones for his mistake. That process of regret that what he did was very wrong. And like this, the qualities of these personalities shine through these stories.
In other words, they're teaching them to develop empathy, which means feeling for the sadness of others, feeling how the other people are experiencing. If you've offended them, how do they feel? To actually go deeper than just to say sorry. To be in that person's shoes. This is also very important, and this comes through in this story of Dhruva Maharaj. Where not only is he being angry, but afterwards when he gets purified, then he actually becomes very empathetic to his stepmother. He's feeling great compassion. He's changed his mood of anger to that of great compassion. So again, we deal with so many things in material life which gives us so much anger, but yet how to channel that, into something wonderful. For example, his mother made every unfortunate situation into a very fortunate one, right? She took something really difficult, which totally devastated her. We can imagine her condition, right? She was totally neglected by the king, right? But she became so glorified. In other words, it also teaches the children how, if somebody is being mistreated, it doesn't mean we need to pity them. It's Krishna's way of teaching that person, and also if that person is a devotee, he ultimately gets glorified, right? So how Suniti became such a wonderful character, even though she was, materially speaking, she was in the worst of situation. One cannot even imagine that situation, right? But yet she made something wonderful out of it. Why? Because of her integrity towards Krishna. In other words, it's taking you through different layers. At the basic level, we're learning qualities like gratefulness, giving up envy. These are basic value-based education, right? But then as we go higher and higher, we are learning deeper and deeper things. In other words, we're learning how to surrender. Ultimately, we're learning better than Suniti is Krishna. Because at one point, Suniti says, you need to go to Krishna because I know I'm your mother, but see, I cannot do anything for you. But if you go to Krishna, he's like millions of mothers. It's not one mother, but millions of mothers. In other words, he's so much better. So he's taking the child into a higher level. Okay, I have such wonderful people here, but ultimately it's Krishna that I need to surrender. In other words, she was so chaste to Krishna, in spite of everything. And this is what Dhruva got through in this story, is how to ultimate chastity is to Krishna. So it's taking you at a very high level. And it's amazing when I do these classes with children, they're completely very amazed, because we go through all the different layers, and they think, when we have a realizations class, they say, wow, I just thought it was just a story, a Dhruva story. His mother, got mistreated and this. But now it's just like a whole thing. It's just so amazing. It's so deep. You see? So you give them that layer, you peel off the layer as they are ready for it. But it's amazing, within a span of 1 or 2 years, the layers that they go is just like an adult. As like we would have a sit down with a Bhagavatam class with adults, and how deep we can go, because our understanding is more mature, right? But children come to that same level, is how much because it just trains you to go deeper and deeper. And as you go deeper and deeper, then you actually become more and more reflective. And being reflective means, you adding more philosophy in your life, which means you're a better person, Who are those people who are having bad qualities or problems? It's people who think very shallow. They just take people at face value. Okay, he's bad because he looks like that. He's got an ugly face. But what is beyond that, right? So this is what the children gain from these stories. And it's not like we need to know everything, like I didn't know everything. But Krishna will, how when you read, Prabhupada says, when you read Shastra, then every time you read, you get fresher and fresher, newer and newer meanings. So I remember each time over the years as I read, every time I find a new meaning, And it's said that Lord Chaitanya heard these stories from Gadadhar Pandit hundreds of times. and he never got tired, and he kept hearing them. Because the lessons are just unlimited. And every time, over 40 years, you can read it, and each time you're going to get a new lesson, new meaning into these stories. So morally, it can create children and people who are very, very exemplary, actually. And that's why Prabhupada had this faith that if we read his books, we will be gentlemen, right? We will be gentlemen. And this is what he wanted to create. And that's why he was in such a rush to create a whole society of brahmanas, you know? Because that's what, the society lacked the head. We had the hands, the arms, everything was there. The stomach, everything was there. But the head was lacking. And that's why he knew that, and that's why he translated these books. He was in such a rush to translate these books. And in the early days, the devotees were distributing all the way till 9th canto. Because, and it's nowadays, we just distribute the first 2 cantos unless we're selling sets, right? And Prabhupada said, as long as it's put in the right perspective, how Prabhupada's puppets are so wonderful, because he's drawing in from all these acharyas. It's not his own thing, his own creation, right? So they are placed in the proper perspective. They are very bona fide. So when we hear these shastras with these puppets, then it makes a difference. Then we are safe. It doesn't matter. Even if anybody out there, reads Srimad Bhagavatam. So I want to take you to the methodology. Yes. So a little brief explanation on the methodology.
So this is how you would teach it at home with your children, this methodology.
Yes. So, like I said, I was homeschooling, and I had these 2 children. So we would sit down in a circle, the 2 children and myself. My husband was at work, and we would begin by reading translations. Now, in the early days, I did not begin from first canto, chapter 1, because I wasn't sure how much they could accept, pure philosophy. As you know, first canto is a lot of philosophy and fewer stories. And so I started with stories like Dhruva Maharaj, Prahlad Maharaj, Gajendra and the crocodile. And it became very interesting for them because these are stories. And we would sit down and each one would take turns reading a translation. And then I would stop for discussions. So just like I mentioned to you some of these questions, for example, in the Dhruva questions, so many questions can be raised, right? And so those questions you can bring up again and again as to the children, and then you ask them, and they love it, because when a child gets the chance to speak and give their opinion, they actually enjoy it very much, and they like to read. So the reading, turn by turn, is very valuable because it traps their mind. You know how children get distracted, but then when it's their turn to read, there's less distraction because they are excited about it. They like to read. The phone classes that I do, even among older children, I'm so surprised sometimes. If I happen to skip to call out the name of one child, immediately they're upset. You missed my name. They just love to read, right? And then we would have the discussion like that. So, and then of course the discussion part, like I was saying, that how it is so important. How today in schools, it is pretty much a monologue. The teacher teaches and the students listen. But, but they found out that this is not a very effective way of teaching. The more effective way is what they follow in the Vedic system, which used to be a tutorial system, where one teacher would be and a few students, and they would have this discussion, individually. Just like they even follow that in Cambridge and Oxford, right? The tutorial system. And it's very, very successful. It's a very successful way of teaching. Why? Because there's discussion. What does discussion do? It sharpens the intellect, right? It makes a child think. It helps a child put it in perspective. It increases the communication skills. So by using this methodology of, challenge, asking, not only asking questions, but playing the devil's advocate. I don't know if you heard classes by Srila Prabhupada where during morning walk conversation, where one devotee becomes a materialist or Prabhupada becomes a materialist, either way, and the other one becomes a devotee. And they're challenging each other. They're talking about the difference between the body and soul, and they are debating with each other. They're playing devil's advocate. And it used to be a lot of fun. And the similar topics about scientists, how the frog's philosophy and things like that. If you hear these classes, it gives you a lot of ideas how to do these things with children. And we used to have a lot of fun, to play these devil's advocate. And every time I've tried, even later on when I do that with children now, it's just so much fun. Even a 6-year-old will say, can we do a story about, about materialist arguing with a devotee or something? They don't quite grasp everything, but they know it's something so exciting, So in other words,
like a nice example of this is, the Bhagavatam, one of the things it does, it describes a creation story. It describes how the universe comes about, from Daksha, and it's describing an evolutionary process, but an evolutionary process that's guided by the Supreme Lord, that's not random or done by chance. So in the modern world, we find the evolutionary process also described by Darwin, but that all happens by chance. So one can raise the question, that what is the likelihood that this whole universe, with all of its variety and its different personalities and places and beautiful things in this world, what is the possibility of it turning into this universe all by chance? What is the possibility for the universe to become what it is by chance? And people say today that, well, it's just like if a large garbage dump, some very big garbage dump, it turns into a Boeing 747. That's how likely it is that the universe would, just by random chance, would turn into the universe that we find today. Of course, I know that the Boeing 737s are pretty much trash, but it's pretty unlikely, right, that a big pile of trash would turn into a 747. But the Bhagavatam is telling the same process of evolution, and it's saying this can't happen by chance, but this evolutionary process happens, but it happens by the direct or indirect guidance of the Supreme Lord. Right? It's like a human de-evolution, where the Supreme Lord, gradually, produces various demigods, and those demigods, step by step, they gradually produce the human being. And that's the story of Daksha and how he creates this universe. But the gradation of species in the Bhagavatam is the same as that which is described by Darwin.
So so I was talking about discussion. So it can we can play devil's advocate, and we can ask questions, and you can even do it in a group, like with different ages. This system can be used in any situation with just 1 or 2 children, or in a group of children who are different ages, starting from 4 or 5 years old. Now, the only when you read a section of the Bhagavatam, then you can put questions to different children of different ages. Some challenging questions to the older children and simple questions to the younger one. It's amazing how the younger children will learn from the older children. They learn so much. Right? So, and then the reflection part, and that is really the most fun for the children. It's amazing how much they like to reflect, because they suddenly find in them the ability to do that, how to take something and actually, to actually sum it up and to realize and to make it practical for their own life. I remember when I was doing Bhagavatam, we'd bring in all types of issues. We were running a temple, so all kinds of problems and devotees and relations, and it was a great chance to discuss those things in light of the Bhagavatam, and we found ourselves, getting into these practical things, not only just the worldly situation and what's happening out there, but just something that affects our own heart, and then growing through that. The mistakes we would make. I would openly talk about, some of the mistakes I would make, and we would learn from that. So it became, so the children could see that, okay, Bhagavatam is meant for us to get better. We are not perfect. We are in the path of perfection, but we are not perfect. So in this way, there's great communication between the parents and the children. It really opens up. It's a great way to actually open up that communication, because when children go to school, there's a time when they just close up, because there's so many things that they think parents cannot relate with me. My life is so different out there. But look at my life here, it's so different, right? How can they understand what I'm going through? And so they close up. And they may not want to also, right? So what happens is when we do these scriptures together, then they actually start opening up on their own, because it's in the context of somebody else. You want to say something?
Yes, this process of discussion is very powerful, and we would take turns reading the translation. So I would read one translation, my mother would read another translation, my brother would read another translation, and then we would take turns discussing it, or we would discuss it together. But initially the children cannot read purports. It's very difficult for them. So we would go through the Bhagavatam very quickly by reading the translations. But my mother had read them from before, and so she would give us the purports in explaining it to us, and then we would discuss it further. And sometimes she would choose a difficult word and mark it in the translations, and then we would use that word as our vocabulary, and then we would have a list of words as our vocabulary list. So, but the main point is that rotation, it keeps you awake. Everyone read one translation, and then the discussion actually makes it relevant. Like my mother was saying, makes it relevant to a person's life, to the child's life.
Now I've seen children who've grown up with Bhagavatam, and you see the way they speak. I mean, they have such good command over the language. The whole mode of talking is just so different. Just yesterday I met a wonderful boy who had done Bhagavatam for some years now. And I could see.
Here.
Where is he? Sai Krishna?
Sai Krishna.
Yeah.
No, he's not there. Oh, I see. I'm sorry.
Oh, and you're Nikhil? Are you? No. What's your name? Shamik? Okay. You're also one of them, huh? Okay. Anyway, but he's Sai Krishna, and he's the daughter of Kalindi Preeti. Anyway, but I could see the difference because of the power, and the potency of these books also. It's not just the vocabulary, but the potency of these books. Immediately you see the difference. So one should, I don't know what point I was making, but yeah.
The Bhagavatam makes good vocabulary. You can see
No, I've already said that. Anyway, so this takes care of the purports. Now, they don't need to read the purports because it becomes very cumbersome for them. It's just, for children, they need the story going. But what I would do is read the purports ahead of time, and I would just make points about what I would like to discuss, okay? And then open it up for discussion. It's not like you have to find the points in every purport. No, just things that you think they will, make it very interesting, and things that they can learn from. That you can point out, right? So in other words, we are still giving them the purports, full-blown purports, but in a way they can digest through discussion, right? And then as they get older, because they've digested and they are able to go so deep, they will naturally be drawn to purports. They will end up reading purports. But we don't need to give them at such an early age, right? And we can do just stories, and then till they become attracted to Bhagavatam, and then you can go from Canto 1, Volume 1, Chapter 1. You don't need to start from the beginning, just so to make it palatable enough where they can actually like it, where they become attracted to it. It takes a while, it takes a little time, but it's quite not very difficult. So we'll go on to the next slide now.
And also, if one is teaching through the Bhagavatam, and it doesn't have to be that way, but we would also have writing assignments from what we would read. So the reflection part is there, that then you can reflect on it, write an essay on it, on that section. have a question from that section.
But the one thing one has to be very careful about is not to make it like a school, because they're already getting that from the public schools, right? They're already going to school. They have tons of homework. So for children like that, I would recommend. Now, home education is different because you're actually trying to teach them language arts, right? But for those children who are going to school, we don't want to burden them with questions and marking the words and all that. Bhagavatam should be just really fun. Opening the minds, discussion, no homework, nothing. Because the hearts have to be attracted. And even when I was doing Bhagavatam with them, I remember that for some time I did this underlining and all these things, but I really didn't want it during the Bhagavatam time. When you're actually doing the reading and discussion, you don't want to interfere that with English, learning English. It was a separate time when I did that, Because Bhagavatam, when you're doing Bhagavatam, it should be just you, children, and Bhagavatam, Okay, so that's very important to know, that we don't want to turn it into a drudgery for them, something that they have to do. Okay, I have one more chore to do, so like that. What is it? I cannot, it's ulta, so I cannot see which one is this. Here it is. Yes. So this is, I was telling you yesterday that, how important it is that we can introduce Bhagavatam to even young children, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, and in London they have this baby Bhagavatam group where they teach from every chapter. And I would like to, put on an audio for you, which is only a few minutes long, about this group, this one mother who's done a chapter with her child.
Chirping birds.
I can see chirping birds.
And loads of trees.
Loads of trees, yes. And look, Lally, can you see? There's so many sages.
So
And
did you
sheep
put 1
goose
point?
farming.
Yes,
From the beginning.
yes, you're right.
There he is.
There he is, yes. Oh my gosh, there's many great sages. They've all gathered
do it from the
together to
beginning.
perform a sacrifice for a
Yeah, no, it's okay.
Oh my goodness, where are we? Can you hear that, Lally? Where are we?
We're in the forest, Namisaranya.
The forest of Naimisharanya. Oh wow, it's so beautiful here. What can you see?
Chirping birds.
I can see chirping birds.
And loads of trees.
Loads of trees, yes. And look, Lally, can you see? There's so many sages.
And the sheep goose farming.
Yes. Yes, you're right.
There he is.
There he is, yes. Oh my gosh, there's many great sages. They've all gathered together to perform a sacrifice for 1,000 years, just because they want to please.
Lord Krishna and his devotees.
Yes, they want to please Lord Krishna and his devotees. And who did you say was the leader? Where's the leader?
Sutta Goswami over there.
Oh yes, he's over there. Hare Krishna Sutta Goswami.
Hare Krishna, Sutta Goswami.
Oh my goodness. The other sages, they're very respectful towards him. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I wonder why. Why are they so respectful towards him?
Because he's the tallest,
Or the oldest?
oldest, I think.
Oh, I see.
And he knows all the scriptures.
Really? Wow. So he's the oldest out of all the sages, and he knows all the scriptures in all the world.
And he always listened to his spiritual master, so his spiritual master blessed him.
Oh, right, I see. Because he was very good and he listened to his spiritual master was very pleased with him. His teacher was very pleased, and he lifted up his right hand and he blessed Sutta Goswami. And you know what? Sutta Goswami had loads of friends, and all his friends were learned sages as well. Did you know that? And you know, whoever your friends are, you become like that. And because all his other friends were learned sages, he was also a learned sage too. This is very interesting. Wow. Nice to meet you, Sutta Goswami, and nice to meet you, lovely sages all gathered together. I think Should we see what they're about to do? Somebody else that we're forgetting. Who is it?
It's Sukadev Goswami's daddy.
Yes, oh yes! Sukadev Goswami's daddy. What's his name? Srila
Vasudev.
Vyasadeva.
He's the one that wrote the Bhagavad.
Oh, of course we have to pay obeisances to him. He wrote the Bhagavatam. If it weren't for him, we wouldn't be able to read it. Obeisances to Srila Vyasadeva. Obeisances to Srila Vyasadeva. We honor you.
So here we see a very talented mother who's created this. This is the first chapter, of the first canto, and how well they present. So they have this group where they make creations like that just to make it very interesting for the children. And they tell me that they've made they have wonderful success. How not only the children but the parents are all hooked to Bhagavatam. In April I'm going there for a seminar, and but just through the children, doing programs with the children, the parents have become so enthused about reading Bhagavatam. And they're doing seminars over there where they, study workshops of how to teach Bhagavatam, helping others. It's really exploded over there, just through the process of teaching children, And so for children like that, we can show them, we can create. I remember doing something like that with small children, where I would take something and from the Bhagavatam and make it really creative and imaginative, and I would be jumping around and doing different things. Like, you can make it as fun as you want to, and they do get the message. They do get the message when you act it out and we do fun things for them. So, and the other thing for little children you can do is you can look at the pictures. Prabhupada's books have so many pictures there, and they are just windows to the spiritual world, right? And they never get tired. They keep seeing the same picture again and again, right? And then you can point out, oh, this is a peacock feather, this is a flute. All these things, they make spiritual advancement because it's association of Krishna. And you repeat the stories again and again. So the next slide, Prabhu. Next slide. Then as they get older, 4 and 5-year-olds, it's amazing how much they can understand Bhagavatam at this age. They still don't know how to read, but yet what we can do, we read to them directly from Srila Prabhupada's books, and then we stop again for discussion. The difference is they are not reading, we are reading, right? And you keep stopping for discussion. And it's amazing how much they grasp. I'll tell you a story about a little boy that, actually he was my grandson, and what happened is I was doing this Dhruva story. I sometimes do it over Skype. And this Dhruva story, I was doing that with him. And we came to the part where Dhruva Maharaj, where the airplane comes, and they sit, and they invite Dhruva to sit in the airplane and go back to Godhead. And there's a beautiful description of what the plane looks like. It's got jewels, and it's just so beautiful in description. And then Nanda and Sunanda sitting there. So he got really attracted, and he said, Grandpa, Daddy, I want to sit in that plane now and go back to Godhead. And I said, okay, we'll talk about that, and you can go one day. He said, no, but I want to go now. I want to go on that plane. Then I said, are you sure? Because you'll have to leave your mother and father behind. And he started thinking, and he said, oh, I think I'm going to wait, because I don't want to make the same mistake that Ajamal did. And I don't know. And this happened long time ago, that we had read the story of Ajamal. But he took the two stories together and he put it together and made a comparison. And I see that again and again. Not just my grandson. I see 4-year-old, 5-year-olds, even 5-year-olds. It's amazing how they can go so deep and do these, and understand Bhagavatam like that. So don't underestimate the intelligence of these young children. They actually, because Bhagavatam in itself is so potent. You see, it's not an ordinary book. It's powerful, it's potent. So it will do things that you cannot even imagine, right? And then the ability to ask questions like that is very also good. For example, the story of Vritasura, is he a demon or a devotee, right? how Indra is a demon, is a devotee, but yet he's acting like a demon. So that's also very powerful. I remember, children asking me that, how are we to understand? Because the description of Vritasura is so demoniac, right? But he's such a great devotee. And Indra, he looks so beautiful. He's so royal, so opulent, and yet he's acting so much like a demon, right? So then we get that point across to them, how we should not judge people by the way they look, by their birth. This goes really, really deep. And that's the essence of our philosophy, right? That's the essence of Lord Chaitanya's teachings. How we see people not by their way, their birth, So in this way, the fiber, and we go to the next one, Prabhu. We already talked about that. So just, in other words, with the older children, we go deeper. The questions of not what is happening, but how and why are more prominent, right? Going deeper and deeper as the children getting older and older. For example, I'm doing, I do a group of children, and we've started from the first canto. Now we are actually in the 10th canto. It's amazing. And it's going on for a few years now. And I see these children grow, spiritually growing, and it's amazing. We were doing the 4th canto, the Puranjan story, and then we went Rishabdev, and these are very heavy cantos, right? So much is there. But at one point I asked them, now, what do you think is your favorite story so far? Favorite part of the Bhagavatam? And a lot of them said, Puranjan story. Now, I don't know if you've read the Puranjan story, but it's an allegory. It's not even a direct story. And it's very, very deep. And it's sections are very difficult to understand. But yet, their taste for appreciating these very complicated and very difficult subject matters is already developed, where they can appreciate so much, right? So, because stories like, the story of Jay and Vijay, for example, I remember doing that story, and it's just so amazing because we are learning about, how Krishna is teaching all of us how to manage conflict, right? There's conflict there. Who's right? Are the sages right? Or are Jay and Vijay right? But how Krishna comes and the way he puts everything together is just such a great lesson on how to manage problems, how to manage different opinions. And in a way that he satisfied everybody. But for the children, what was really interesting is that, who's right? We went back and forth. Well, do you think the sages are right? Or do you think the Jay and Vijay are right? Some said sages, and I said, well, you have to tell me why. And there was a nice debate there, who's right. And then then the parent can actually put everything together and show how, in what way the sages were, the Jay and Vijay were wrong. But yet, Krishna showed so much favor to them as well, Like it brings everything into perspective. The issue of anger is there. Sages are being angry and they are greatly liberated souls. Why are they angry? Is anger okay? So throughout Bhagavatam, to deal with the issue of anger, there's so many stories. I know one boy, he had such an issue with anger. He would go flying into temper tantrum. When he would get angry, even the parents were scared of him. It's something that he brought from his last life or something. And they were totally helpless. They didn't know what to do. And, I talked to them and I said, just do Bhagavatam. And they've been doing Bhagavatam over the years and his anger is completely gone. It's completely gone. I mean, almost gone. We all have a tendency to get angry, right? So I'm saying that why? Because through these stories we are hearing, Dhruva's story, he also shows anger towards the yakshas. That kind of anger. Then the sage's anger, So, and you can do great research like that, The prayers, the different types of prayers in Bhagavatam, right? The prayers of the demigods, the prayers of the pure devotees, like Dhruva, So the children know, okay, well, demigods are also praying, but we can pray to Krishna at our own level. The demigods are saying, give back my kingdom, I'm really suffering, I'm missing my kingdom, I need to get my opulence back, right? They're praying to Krishna, but Krishna is also chastising them. I'm really disappointed with you. In the story of Vritasura, when they went to Krishna for help, Krishna really chastised them. But he was also very compassionate. He did help Indra to get the throne back, right? So in this way, we can see that, okay, they have material desires. But what is the best prayer? who is praying in the best way. So we hear about other prayers of other great devotees. You see? So many things are there which can be children. And so when children doing Bhagavatam, I mean, I have rarely any child who drops out because they just get very attached. And I know of cases of parents who are doing regularly with their children and they can't stop. The children are hooked. If they ever leave, they come back to it. Right? Sai Krishna was there last night and he dropped out. And last night he said, Mataji, I want to come back. Because once they develop that attraction, they have to. Now, this can happen with the parents, not just with me. It can happen with anybody. People who are hooked to reading Bhagavatam with their children as a family together, they love it. They don't want to give it up. So, what is next? हमारा उल्टा चल रहा है.
Video दिखाना.
Okay, we can also show you a short video of a mother in England who had this experience of reading Srimad Bhagavatam with her child and the effects of that. It's a very short video, so let's show that to you. Yeah. और किसके बाद क्या बोलना है? ये हम सोचते हैं अडल्ट टॉपिक से करना है. Violence.
How to correct non-Bhagavatam topic. How to
Discipline.
discipline.
Oh yeah.
Because that's always a big thing.
How is your questions holding it? इसके बाद
पहले question. इसका question. ये तो क्या है?
छोड़ दो इसको छोड़ दो करना.
नहीं ये अच्छा है. We end with this and then have questions.
So we'll show this video and then we'll have questions. So.
And then we'll after that we'll have we'll cover the last part of our seminar, and that's preaching is the essence. Okay, and maybe an extra topic like discipline if we have time. So actually it's already 12:20.
Yeah, but we started of course.
Yeah. So just to make that point that even though I was homeschooling, I just want to share that with you that no matter whatever time that you can give with your children to study Bhagavatam is always valuable. In other words, they're going to school, but if you can give some time, I know some parents whose children are going to school, they give like half hour every evening to study Bhagavatam with them. That's very valuable. But if you cannot even give that, then at least like once a week, maybe on the weekends, you can study Bhagavatam with the children. So it's not just meant for people who are educating their children at home. It's for everyone, because there's no loss in that.
Yes, reading Srimad Bhagavatam was the most important part of our homeschooling. So that was like the center of it. And so like my mother's saying, those parents who are not homeschooling can still have, partly at least, that experience by doing the Srimad Bhagavatam part, by teaching Bhagavatam at home, by reading Bhagavatam at home with their children in this way of reading and discussing. They can have that same effect, even if they're not able to do the homeschooling part.
Hare Krishna, my name's Aruddha Devi Dasi. I'm a homeschooling mother of 2 young girls, and we were inspired by Aruddha Ji's seminars on Krishna conscious homeschooling through the Srimad Bhagavatam. So we've decided to take the plunge and homeschool, and we've been homeschooling for about 1.5 years now. The results so far are quite incredible. that I'd like to share with you. So firstly, in terms of our Krishna consciousness, it's we really feel quite settled and happy in our Krishna consciousness. So we discuss the Srimad Bhagavatam a chapter a day. We read through and we discuss different points that we might find relevant or things that we don't quite understand. There was an instance where my daughter was telling me about some child that had said something about her to other children. As a mother, what do you say to that? You feel upset yourself, like, oh God, what do I say? And I kept quiet. And then she said, but I can't have any bad feelings towards this person. The Bhagavatam tells me that. I was like, where does it say that? And we'd just finished reading the Dhruva Maharaj story, and she'd remembered that the first instruction that Dhruva's mother, Suniti, had said to Dhruva after he'd been offended by his stepmother was not to inflict any pain on others, not to have any bad feelings towards others, not to say anything bad about them, And she'd really taken that to heart and thought, whatever comes to me, I should not react back. And I was so relieved, because I wouldn't be able to give that sort of advice in my conditioned state. So it was quite nice that Krishna's taking care of the character development, the moral development for my children. The critical thinking skills are really developing. I'm noticing that. I'm also noticing her grammar, her spellings, her ability to read fluently is all coming from the Srimad Bhagavatam. So that's on a more kind of mundane academic level. It's actually doing quite well in that aspect. Yeah, her attention span is amazing. She's able to sit for that whole hour and really stay engaged. It's an hour, maybe even longer, but she's able to stay engaged. I guess the Bhagavatam really kind of brings you in and really keeps you engaged. So we're very grateful to Aruddha Mataji. It's really brought us together as a family. That's another thing. We have this really amazing connection. If you discuss together, the connection just gets deeper and deeper because you're actually spending that quality time with your children. We found that the Bhagavatam in itself as a curriculum, as a syllabus, it seems to fulfill an innate need that no other syllabus or curriculum has been able to fulfill. We've tried other things as well, just in case, but actually none of us feel as happy as when we're focusing just on the Bhagavatam. It really reaches the heart like nothing else does.
I feel really inspired to do another chapter, and I want to keep hearing more and more and more, and I never want to stop reading. Hearing.
It reaches the heart like nothing else does.
I feel really inspired to do another chapter, and I want to keep hearing more and more and more, and I never want to stop reading. Hearing. It's the Bhagavatam. I can't let go of it.
There on the Yamuna's banks, Lord Govinda then began.
So there's one point that I was thinking that I want to share with you, is that it's also very wonderful for children who are trying to make sense of so many things. You know how our values are different when we are devotees, and the values that they see outside, which is commonplace, is different. So how to bring that together? In other words, how to deal with that? Because there's so much happening out there where there's free association of, girls and boys, and it's considered completely normal, right? And whereas we are telling our children, well, you shouldn't do that, right? So Bhagavatam becomes a great place to actually make sense of that, to actually put everything in perspective, because it does that really wonderfully, How, because many parents in seminars, they ask me that question, that how don't you think, in places Bhagavatam is talking about is too many adult topics? How can children, should we expose them to that? Or should we expose them to the violence that's, explained in the Bhagavatam. So many places, the story of Parushuram, where he's, there's rivers of blood with hands and legs floating in the water, and then the 10th canto where Krishna is finding creative ways to kill the demons, and Hiranyakashipu, when he's pulling out the intestines, is pretty violent. And should I expose the children to these kind of violent scenes? Isn't it the same that the violence that they see in the movies or in TV shows or whatever? It is very different from between the two, because here both of these topics are put into perspective. Violence by Krishna is done for a particular purpose, and Krishna takes care of it. In the entire 10th canto, you'll never see ever the cowherd boys going and killing the demons, or Nanda Baba or Yashoda doing that, right? Krishna takes care. In other words, the message is that Krishna will protect, and also the violence that is done by the devotees of the Lord is done for a particular purpose. In other words, violence is committed to root out the violence, to root out another violence. Just like you use a thorn to pick out the thorn, right? So in other words, there's a purpose. And what is the violence that you see today? It has no sense. You see a movie, somebody is shooting another person, and they're all shooting each other, and you don't know why and when it's happening. There's one big commotion, right? And it's done, that kind of violence is done for gratifying one's own senses. And that violence degrades us. But the violence that we see in the Shastra is done for a higher purpose. Just like in Bhagavad Gita, right? At one point, Arjuna is thinking all violence is bad. But after hearing from Krishna, he was convinced that violence also has its place. Responsible violence also has it. And he became, he became glorified because of that. So in other words, all these things, Krishna puts it in proper perspective. The same question of sex, Bhagavatam deals with it in such a wonderful way, where it shows the results of good sex and bad sex. And we see how great souls like Kashyapa Muni, Daksha, they engaged in sex in order to create wonderful progeny, right? To create nice children in the world. But then we also see a contrast to the Puranjan story, where we see lusty relationships between man and woman. But then we also see the effects of that lusty relationships, how they have to undergo a great suffering and meet this, they have to ultimately deal with the age and death, right? So the children get a chance to see, okay, if we do something to please Krishna, if we follow religious principles, that is not against dharma, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, I am sex according to religious principles. In other words, we are using that to please Krishna. But what do we see in society today? It's just for one's sense gratification. It's not even within the institution of marriage, right? So so naturally children, they grow up thinking this is okay. So, but when you put it in the perspective of Bhagavatam, because nothing in the Bhagavatam is so transcendental, nothing is going to be harmful for the children. As long as we are guiding them through that, through that process of understanding. We put limitations, restrictions on what we can discuss, the details. But yet, they do get the understanding this material world is here precisely because of this attraction between opposite sex. This is the nature of this material. But how we can use it in the service of Krishna, this comes through in so many places, so many stories. That comes clearly. How this very same attraction can be used to please Krishna. You see? So what I'm trying to tell you is that nothing in the Bhagavatam is going to be harmful for them. And even difficult questions in their life, relationships, how to deal with this society, which is so liberal and so totally permissive, degraded in terms of values in this area, how to see it and how to get the conviction that yes, this is not something I want to do. There was somebody who asked my older son, one time that you went to Oxford and you were on your own for so many, and there's some really, there are girls there, right? Nice looking girls. So how did you deal with that, Did you not feel an attraction? Did you not want a relationship? And he said that, well, I heard it one time, somebody else told me about it. He said that, well, when there was a girl in question, I would think that if I'm going to marry this girl, am I going to marry this girl? And if the answer was no, then yes, I cannot have a relationship. You see? In other words, in this world, we do have to interact with each other. With boys have to interact with girls, but how that interaction is different from being intimately related to that person, right? This is where we stop. So by raising them this culture of Krishna consciousness, the children get a clear picture, of how we should relate with this problem, and they get the conviction. Do you want to add?
Just on this point that my mother mentioned, that violence and sex are things that children will encounter in today's society anyway. So when they encounter it in the Bhagavatam, then they see the proper use and the proper place of violence and sex. And that's why it's better that they first encounter it in the Bhagavatam than in the outside world. So that's why when parents ask in response to this question, which my mother is saying that, well, should we cover these topics? Is it okay to read Bhagavatam with my child because these things are discussed? It is okay, because if the parents don't discuss it through the Srimad Bhagavatam, then the children will encounter it anyway, the way the world is. But at least through the Bhagavatam, they're getting the proper place, the proper understanding, the proper perspective on these two things. So there's many adult topics, you could say, in the Bhagavatam, many, you could say, discussions in the Bhagavatam that are for more older people, but the children, even if they encounter those sections and they read them, the Bhagavatam is such that it actually makes sense to them. Like they appreciate it in a very mode of goodness way. That this is what true character, true civilization is.
Yeah, and also like for children who are getting older, they have to enter Grahastha life one day, right? So many nice, wonderful stories are there which shows examples of good Grahastha life, right? The story of Kardamuni and Devahuti, Prithu Maharaj and Archie, they're great examples for children to understand that this is good Grahastha life, And then we have stories, then we have this contrast of Prahlad Maharaj when he talks about Gramedi life, and he's describing in this graphic terms of what household life is, right? It's like a well, full of snakes, because there's so much suffering in that. But yet, by reading the good stories of good Grahastha life, you can see the contrast. So they understand, okay, this is Gramedi life, when we lead a life like that, and this is real Grahastha life. So this way, children can compare and get good conviction, I think I'll stop here, and now I would like to hear from you if you have any questions regarding this particular topic of Srimad Bhagavatam.
So Mataji, I think you probably answered this, but you're suggesting that do this on a daily basis. Okay.
Yeah, that would be wonderful if you can do it. Everybody has time, it's just that we have to, sometimes we feel like we don't have time, but we simply have to create time. We have to prioritize what is important. In other words, if we've lost, our soul, then what have we gained, materially speaking, right?
Correct.
And this is a very crucial time for children, where they're dealing with a lot of stuff out there. And it's really, they may not like to do it because they haven't developed that taste, but just by, initially it's going to be hard, just to bring them to that point of sitting down. But once you've started that, then it's going to be easy. You will naturally, yes, if you can do it every day, even for half hour, it's very, very beneficial.
Mataji, did you have any teaching experience before doing it? Because I think the way you were talking about certain things is like discussions, asking creative questions. It is like you have to be creative to ask that kind of questions. Not everybody could do it. So like do you have that background of teaching or?
Actually, I'm not a teacher at all. Yeah, I'm just a regular housewife, you know. But you know, this, you actually don't need that experience, because it comes, you know, parents are natural teachers. It just comes automatically. You're always teaching anyway, right? We are always preaching to our children. It's natural to us. It's not something that you have to learn. As you read the Bhagavatam, these things will come. When you read the purports, you know, these questions will come up. They will automatically come up. You don't have to work too hard for that. I don't remember working very hard on that level. And many times I never had time. I would just never prepare anything. I would just sit and do it without any reading of purpose. Then ahead of time, because I didn't have time. Then even then it was very wonderful for them, because we always we are older and we have more experience. We have life experience that we can share, right? And during the class, if you haven't read ahead of time, you can actually read a couple of purposes for them. It's amazing when they ask questions, sometimes you cannot answer them, and then you read a couple of purposes and the answer is right there. So one should not think that I'm not capable. I don't have good command over English, or I'm in high school or whatever. One of the devotees, American family, she's just passed high school, and she's just like teaching Bhagavatam like anything. And the children are so bright, so bright. So it can be done by anyone, because intelligence is not measured by the degrees we take. You know, we all know that, right? Any other questions?
Yeah, Mataji, one question. Like, you were saying that you were working on a book, right? Like, is there any timeline you're looking for that book which comes up with a systematic study of all the cantos of Bhagavatam, or?
No, we have the first canto here, and we ran out, so you're going to get more, you know, very soon. But then we have second canto, first canto 2 volumes, then second canto, and third canto 2 volumes. We finished the first volume of canto 3, and we're working on the second volume, and we're also working on canto 4. So we're trying to go as fast as we can, you know. We have a whole team of devotees from all over the world. They're from everywhere, New Zealand, Australia, you know, England, you know, Africa, everywhere. And so they all everybody is expert in some area, you know, and I coordinate that. I actually train them how to do it, and then I look over the, you know, the material, you know. So it's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of hard work. It's not something that just we do overnight. We put a lot of energy into that. And it's been accepted, these books, by several gurukulas, and there's many Sunday schools who are actually using these books on a regular basis. They think Chicago Temple is using these books on a regular basis every Sunday, because somehow the children love it. They hang on to these books, you know, like they come so happy, you know, in the temple where Gopal is leading is the Indianapolis temple. They also, these little children, they bring their books with them. They're waiting for Sunday school because they want to hear Bhagavatam, you see? So, and then there's individual parents who are doing it with their children at home also. And then I travel in Europe and the Czech Republic, and they started using these books. You know, it's just like, you know, so it's spreading because there's something about Bhagavatam. It's just so engaging, and it makes an effect. Like parents are seeing and teachers are seeing the difference in creating in the children's lives. That's, you know.
Yeah, Mataji, one more question, follow up on that one. Along with the systematic theoretical study, any kind of fun activities other than that, engaging the kids so that they are more into it and they can get a practical application moving forward in that direction?
Yes. These guidebooks are made in such a way, presented in a fun way. There's a lot of fun things in that. There's crossword puzzles, there's, you know, a lot of, you know, art projects, a lot of fun things also. But they are all based on understanding the philosophy, the themes, you see. So yes, it's presented in a way that the children can digest. There's also going to be, you know, critical thinking activities and introspective activities, for, you know, for helping them progress in those skills. But also there's fun activities. And it's for children, they can use it all the way up to like 14 or 15 years old. so they can, because you can adapt it according to their level. And there's so many activities you can just pick and choose. You don't have to do each one. And every activity is based on the chapter, the themes of the chapter.
Hare Krishna Madhani, I have a question. Thank you for your wonderful class. The one question I wanted to know, like, is there any prerequisite before going for Bhagavatam? Because I was hearing on one of the things, like we should also take Bhagavad Gita for kids or some of the theme or chapters so they can cope up with Bhagavatam. And then I heard from Prabhuji, like second canto, like first is more of a creation, more detail. They may not be ready. This sort of thing. And then the books we were talking about also, there's like on particular age base, or it is a common for 5 to 15, or like, I wanted to know about that.
So, for example, we'll go back. These books are all the way from 7 to 8 years old. You know, you can adapt it for children younger than them. There's fun activities there, art projects and all that the younger children can do. But mostly it's from the level where children are a little bit older, like maybe 7 at the earliest, you know, and all the way to 15. Okay. And what was your next question? Yeah, so you can do that. You can do Bhagavad Gita, and I know many children are doing Bhagavad Gita, and it's wonderful. You can actually do that. My point was that, you know, you must also include Bhagavad. That's all, you know. And I used to do Bhagavad Gita. We would just read one verse and do, you know, some information from the prophet like that. But then we would also do Bhagavatam. But we weren't doing as regularly as the Bhagavatam because the philosophy was all there. It's just more digestible for your children, you know. But there's nothing wrong with doing Bhagavad Gita. If you can present it, in fact, people have said, can you create a team to have Bhagavad Gita guidebooks, you know, for children. And it's so much work, so I don't know if I will ever get to that. So.
How do you inspire children to start reading Bhagavad? Because when you both see starting from this book, they start giving all excuses to you. They take practical tips on that.
Yeah, actually, initially when I started reading Bhagavatam, I distinctly remember this. I was thinking the only reason I'm reading is just to please my mother. And then after that, I really started liking it, where I would want to read it myself.
Yeah, and then you get so attracted that sometimes when you have difficult times in your life, and you know, just things, issues come up, and the children feel they know what's going on. Then you can actually take shelter of these because you already have developed the taste. And I remember that one particular time we were having a hard time, and then Gopal and me, my oldest son had gone to Oxford by then, we would sit down and read Bhagavatam just to get the answers. Because it just becomes so much a part of your life. You know that this is the place to find guidance, you know. And it really gives you so much comfort. So just the beginning is a little hard, you know, but once you do it, and even if it means that you just have to tell them to do it, they did do it. Like that, and then they develop a taste.
Bhagavatam is actually very interesting. Like even from a non-spiritual point of view, it's a very interesting book. So it's just about getting started in it, like you're saying. Getting started is hard. And so one small tip that I do have actually is, especially with children, is not to be so concerned about sequence. Like, you know, verse 1, verse 2, verse 3, all the purports, first canto, second canto. That's very nice to do it. And through my mother's books, especially, the children, they really get into these also. But initially, just for the taste of it, you could do a few stories first. Like Gajendra, Prahlad, and read them with the instructions. There's actually the meaning or the message is more interesting than even the story. From just a story point of view, they're simple stories. But like the amazing teachings that you get from them, the insights, those are what are very interesting. Even for children, you know, that age, they can figure it out. Like, oh, this is very. So, like, I would start with some stories and get their mind into it. or start with the books that my mother is publishing, like First Canto, and then there's some crossword puzzles there and those things. Like, find a way to make it fun so they have the taste. And once they have the taste, then you can, do it like a more systematic.
The idea of these guidebooks is to make it possible for us to begin, in the early from Canto 1. But this methodology of reading, sitting together and reading, it has to be done, even if you're using the guidebooks. Point is, discussion, sitting together and discussing, and then using the guidebooks to, to go deeper and to understand the chapter better. So that is not to be missed out. In other words, reading directly from Srila Prabhupada's books.
Hare Krishna Mataji, just following up on this, because I think the example that was given for that young child and the mother just opened up the eyes for many of us. So are there recorded either videos of actual sessions where some of these parents are doing with the kids, even if it's not for every one of them, maybe just some sample videos that will help us to see what has worked, just to put that for experience for us, the parents. It's something that maybe, if it is not done, maybe just even doing few samples could help also.
Okay. Yes, I have also suggested that we should make some presentations, some videos like that, where we take, because there's so many parents now all over the world, who are doing this with their children, so I can, we can put it all together. And I get a lot of feedback from the Gurukulas, and I get pictures from them and, what they're doing, and the feedback from the teachers and the vice principal. So I get all that, so maybe I can put it together at some point and do it.
Also, another way to get a first-hand experience of that is my mother does, on the telephone, she does Bhagavatam classes for children of different age groups. And she basically does on the phone what she would do with us in person. So the students on the phone, on the conference call, they take turns reading one verse each, and then she discusses it with them, and then they discuss. And so a nice way of getting a first-hand experience of what to do at home is you could listen to one of her classes on the phone, sort of just listen to the whole thing, or your child can participate in it as a way to get started, because she does that exact same thing on the phone, just like she would do in person. And that's every day almost. Every day my mother does a telephone class with the child.
Yeah, if you just have to let me know, and then I'll give you the code, conference call number, and you can, get into that and hear a few classes, and this way you get an I let parents do that, because in order to encourage them to start teaching themselves, So, yeah.
And it's also available for children, like you're saying, of certain age groups to join.
And basically I started over the phone, I start from Canto 1 with groups. Before I used to only do the stories. Now it is because I have more experience, I'm able to grasp their attention just on, even though it's harder over the phone, but somehow where Krishna's grace is working. But what I'm saying is that it can work even as parents. You just learn the skills as you do it. So it's like he said, start with the stories, but then even the stories are so deep. There's so much philosophy there. I mean, the Bharat Maharaj story, the story of Jat Bharat, and his conversation with Raghuna is so deep. It's a beautiful story and very fascinating story, but there's information which is so deep. It doesn't take too long for them to go back to Canto 1. Because you already, even in the stories, you're dealing with so much philosophy. But it's just put in a very digestible way. Initially they may think, oh my gosh, again I'm stuck with these prayers. Like when the prayers start, it goes on and on and on. So you don't have to stop at every prayer. You keep, some sections which is becoming too, very uninteresting for them, you can go faster. You just keep reading, and then you stop when you have to stop. But then over time, those very prayers become very tasteful to them. It's amazing how they want to get into the prayers. It doesn't take too long to get to that level. It doesn't. Any other questions?
You can publish those details, what we have. You can publish the details of the sky for the conference calls.
Oh, okay. Yeah. We have information here, an email that we can put on the board here.
Yes.
It's called resources. Resources? No, not resource. Yes.
Resources, it's the last slide. Okay. Yeah, it's on the last slide, I think. It's entitled Resources. It's right there. Yeah, one more down. Resources, yeah.
So the email address is right there, so you can take it down. And I also want to mention this book. It's called Homeschooling Krishna Children. And even though it's called homeschooling, all the principles that are mentioned here is what we discussed today in the seminar. And it's a lot more detailed here. In other words, it's a book on how to raise children. And the methodology of teaching Bhagavatam has also been elaborately described in this book. So if anybody would like a copy, we have a few copies. And if you need more, I can immediately, I can take an order and send it to you. This was published by several years ago, and by BBT. So very nice. Any other questions? We had the last section of the seminar. I don't know. Should we do that, or should we now end it?
So, how long will it take, Mataji, the last
one? I think about 10-15 minutes. 15 minutes.
So, then we can continue. So, we can continue now, Mataji. So, I mean, if you want to take 5-minute break and come back, because if they go home, it is just 15 minutes, we'll continue.
I mean, I'm okay skipping that section also. I mean, I wanted to get to the Bhagavatam because it's really the heart of the seminar. So if people are feeling tired and they need to, you just have to let me know, and I don't have to do it.
Yeah, just
one. Preaching is the essence. Everybody wants to continue?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, we'll make it really fast.
So preaching is the essence. The slide is 36.
This is our last section of the Bhagavatam. So, like I was saying, how Krishna, giving Krishna consciousness to our children is all encompassing. In other words, we talked about how we should, our own, the sadhana for our children. How we should develop that purity within the heart, inside and outside. And then we talked about the intelligence, how that has to be fed. And now we will talk about preaching. In other words, we don't want to isolate our children. We want them to be able to reach out, to actually give that, what they've taken up, to give it to others. Okay? Sometimes we think that preaching or teaching is something that children should do later. This is the time to study, to be a student, to study, and preaching can come later. But teaching itself is a type of a very strong way of learning. And I don't know if you have the experience, if you ever had to present something to someone, like give a class, you will end up knowing that topic in and out, right? Because you have to study it so well. Because not only have you understood it in through books, but now you have to take up the challenge of actually presenting it in a way that others can understand. Then you have to study that subject even deeper, right? I remember one time when Gopal did his Shastri, it so happened that they offered it in Philadelphia, and then they stopped, unfortunately. It was offered in America. And so he went there, and then when he came back, the temple devotees, they asked him to give a seminar on the first 16 chapters of Nectar of Devotion. And then he wrote about it, how he was just like studying day and night.
In order to teach it, I have to study it more carefully. Right? Before I kind of studied it, read it like that, but when I had to actually teach it, give a seminar on nectar devotion, then I imbibe that same knowledge more deeply.
And
they say you learn when you teach.
Why? Because when we teach to others, then we have to be able to articulate. We have to be able to accept challenge, questions. So you have to know the subject matter. So in other words, if a child is presenting Krishna consciousness to others, to outsiders, he has to know the subject matter well, right? So it gives him a chance, and this way it increases the faith, their identity as devotees. And so in order to do that, we were doing, different types of things, like preaching in schools. For example, when they were little, we went to preschools and libraries where I contacted them and they asked them if they would like us to present the Vedic philosophy. In Boise, they knew us as the Hare Krishnas, and they were very comfortable with that. So we were able to, go to them and they would accept. And a lot of times they do accept because they're so starved of cultural diversity. Especially in a place like Idaho, there was so much a need of diversity that as soon as you approached them, they were always willing for that. Even libraries, they were so open about it. And the children were little, obviously they could not make a presentation. It was us who was making it. But yet by accompanying us, by observing, they were learning a lot. And they would be able to present it in places where they could do the chanting, explain their dress, their tilak. So they were able to present, they could be able to develop the confidence of showing themselves as devotees. And then the people in the end would clap, they would feel very proud. Oh, I'm a devotee, right? So we would make that presentation, we would divide it into different parts. For example, the music of India, geography of India, and many times by just making it cultural like that, but yet all the questions would be all Krishna conscious. We were able to talk about chanting, we were able to talk about prasadam, we were able to talk about why the cow is sacred. Everything was there, right? And then we would open up for questions, they would ask questions. And this is something so wonderful that you can do it in your own temple. All you have to do, and you can go as a group. Later on, as that temple got bigger, a lot of devotees went along. And we all went, and the kids would give bigger presentations, a dance presentation, or music performance. They would put these dots on the girls and tilak and so many nice things. And then we would, for the little children, I would do the Krishna art book. You know that big art book where they have a lot of pictures and stories? We would show the children, these outside children, right? And when they would see that, they would be so attracted. They would stop, they would want us to do more and more. And then we'd open up for, and then as the children got older, we approached elementary schools. And the way we approached is that congregation members, they had their children in those schools, and we would ask them permission to make a presentation. And they would contact the class teacher, and most of the times they got permission. So it was easy because the congregation members, they contacted, their children were in that class. And when we would go, we would do the same presentation, slightly different because the children are older, and many times we would open up for questions. And what we found that people were actually really interested in Krishna consciousness and how well they accepted. Sometimes we were really kind of afraid because we thought the crowd is going to be very conservative. but we would be so surprised because it would be just the opposite. And the teachers would be so interested. And then we would take Prabhupada's books, we would take prasadam sweets, we would even take like a peacock feather, conch shell, a Bhagavad Gita to show them Sanskrit, you know. So in this way, they found it very fascinating, and they learned a lot. But the most of all, the benefit it was the children, you know, because all the congregation, all the devotee children, because they got so much confidence in the identity of devotees.
Yes, and then as we grew older, we did high school classes. So these are also very nice. You could do them in Seattle. So as my mother was saying, you know, in younger ages we were going to elementary schools and we were participating in the program. Mainly my mother was doing it. She was telling stories. As we got older, then we would do programs in high schools, and my brother and I would speak at the high school. And just like in many high schools, there's a world religions class, right? And the world religions class is there, and we would find that world religions class, and we'd find the instructor for the world religions class. And most of these classes, they always want guest speakers from those religious traditions to come and present. But it's like, you know, one day you see people dressed in their own culture, in their own religion, coming and presenting to the class, and then students see from many different religions. It's all, you know, it's all very good. It's like giving them a very good experience. So there was this one high school called Bishop Kelly High School, and we would go and speak there in their world religions class. And it was a Christian high school. And when we spoke there, then we would always divide it up. Most of the time my brother would speak and I would do the music. So I would sing and he would speak. And initially the students would chant with us, and then after that my brother would give a presentation on like karma, reincarnation, Krishna, you know, basic key ideas in our philosophy. And these programs, we would do it every semester, so like twice a year. And we got attached to them, and the whole high school there got very attached to these programs. And they would look forward to it. Sometimes students would skip other classes and come to this class because they knew that we were going to make this presentation. And one time in Boise, we had Ganapati Swami visiting us at a time when we were scheduled to speak at the high school class. So we thought, you know, Maharaj is here, so we thought that Maharaj could speak in place of us. So we called up Mrs. Wickham, who was the high school teacher, and we explained to her that we had a special guest, and he's a Swami, sannyasi, and he would come and speak rather than us. But she objected. She said, no, we want you brothers to come and speak. Why? Because I tell my students that, see, in our religion, only the elders give the sermons and give the lectures, and only they understand the religion. But see, in their religion, their youth come and explain to us what their religion is. So in this way, like, we had a very sense of like, you know, oh, this is kind of very special. You know, this is something very nice that we're doing, and that they really appreciate, and they could appreciate us because we were their same age. And the students had a very big impact on, you know, of Krishna consciousness on them. So in this way, they sort of developed. And one thing that I distinctly remember is that my own faith in Krishna consciousness went much deeper as a result of these programs. Because when I had to explain it to others, then I really was defending it, right? So they would ask questions, they would challenge, and we would give a good response. Sometimes I didn't know the response, so I would go back and understand it for myself, like, am I just believing this based on faith? I couldn't at that point because I had to give them a response. So in this way, by preaching, actually the person who benefited the most was myself, because by giving it to others, I had to deepen my own understanding and understand why I believed in things, not because just my parents told me, but why? Because I actually could understand them. I believed in them because I could make sense of them. So therefore, preaching is a very powerful way of deepening, and also they're just a lot of fun. I mean, doing these programs was just so much fun. We'd pack everything in the car, take the harmonium, mridanga, and then do the whole presentation, sometimes in front of the whole high school. The students would sing and clap along. We would come up with different ways to joke and to get them involved and have fun with them. We would tell them we brought instruments for all of you. Every single one of you, we have instruments, and those are your hands. So every one of you can clap along and sing along. they would clap and sing along. We would do it call and response. Then many times they had very questions about karma, like can you reincarnate as a carrot? And we would try to have to explain to them, well, yes, you could reincarnate as a carrot for such and such reason. So a lot of fun, and then as we grew older, then we would do college classes, and we still do college classes where guest speaking at university classes, at university professors, their classes. And now the younger kids in Boise, they do the younger classes, like they'll do the elementary school and high school classes. So there's a lot of potential out there, and more so I'm sure even in Seattle. Before, only Christian schools had world religion classes, but now all the schools, public schools, have world religion classes pretty much. So you can always find a class or a friendly professor who's willing to invite you to your class, to their class. Then also we did prison programs. Those are very memorable, preaching in prisons. I distinctly remember one of the first programs we did. It was like all of us felt that there is something special in those programs. Like, these prisoners, they are so receptive to Krishna consciousness. And there's very nice ways in which you can arrange these things. So, prison programs, Harinams, we would go out on Harinam, book distribution, which I know you do here in Seattle. So all these activities are not for the adults, they're for the children also. That's the main point. That these are all family activities. Wherever my parents went, they always took us with them. My father would go on business trips, sometimes he would take us with him. We were always part of everything, and therefore Krishna consciousness was ours. It was not our parents and then given to us, but it belonged to us. As I mentioned before, my brother would give classes sometimes in the Sunday feast. So our job was not just listening and hearing and being the student, but we were also invited to be teachers and preachers, and that's what inspired us a lot in Krishna consciousness.
Because if children are not part of your life as a devotee, then actually they start losing interest in spiritual life, in Krishna consciousness. So it's important to include the children in our devotional activities so that they always feel a part of it and not think that, okay, they can stay back and, sometimes we get overly worried, they have so much homework, so they can skip coming to the temple, we can just go along. Maybe once in a while that's an emergency, but we should always make a point. I remember that when we didn't have a center in those earlier days, when we were going to the temple, we were thinking, how will we ever get our work done so that we can go to the temple? But somehow, miraculously, by 4 o'clock, everything would wind up. Because you've already made the vow, okay, I'm going to do this. So Krishna arranges that. Many times they had that experience when they were in college, and it was so difficult. Managing the 16 rounds and then college work and so many festivals going on in the temple, how to fit that everything in. And they went through a lot of experiences, how Krishna created time, how Krishna adjusted. One time I know Gopal was saying how he had an exam and somehow, he hadn't studied at all because there's so much going on, right? And then somebody gave him some old examination paper or something, and verbatim those very questions came. So how Krishna will fill in where we lack. See, we have to have the faith that this is very important, this is priority. And we should not think, oh, it can wait. It can wait. So that's one thing, is wherever you go, take the kids with you, and gradually they will want to be a part of it. They want to be a part of the life. I was telling somebody that how we did a seminar in Chowbadi, which is a very wonderful temple, and they saw a very good brahmachari program. And so when we did a seminar there, a big percentage of the crowd was these brahmacharis. And they were preaching to families, and one of the things they encountered is how parents would come and do service in the temple, but they would not encourage the children to come with them. So they were left behind in the house. And how these children were losing interest in spiritual life, So when we leave our children behind and don't make them a part of our devotional life, very soon, and they were very concerned because we've lost the young Vaishnavas, right? So we should always, and you can always find a lot of things to do with them. You know, maybe not on the altar, that you have to do on your own, try to find, work it out with each other. But there are so many other things you can do, volunteer work in festivals, do it with them. Or I think you have more ideas than I do probably on that level, Oh, Nico.
Yeah.
Nice to see you.
Yes.
He's one of my classes.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, they're very nice classes. I really like them. But I have a question about, the high school preaching thing. So, I'm also in high school, but it's very, what I've noticed is it's very hard to grasp the attention of high schoolers, especially when it's coming from other, teenagers. They just don't, treat you with the exact same respect as, like an adult if they're coming in to teach. So how do I get back, how do I get through that barrier to actually, preach to them or tell them about Krishna consciousness?
So at your own high school, the place where you study, that may be true, that situation may be true, because they see you on a daily basis, they think of you as kind of the same. But if you go, and then, so that I'll talk about your own high school, how to do that, but if you go to other high schools, the situation will be different, because they don't know you, they won't take you for granted. And part of the task was to find very interesting ways of presenting it so it's very enjoyable for them. So, for example, when we would present the idea of karma, we would say, well, there's two things that determine your next life. One is what you deserve, and the other is what you desire. And then we would give them an example, karma is like a bank balance. So, let's say, your desire is to go on a vacation, and your desire is to go to Hawaii. Right? So this is your desire. You want to go to Hawaii and have a very nice vacation. But then you look at your bank balance, you only have $200 there. So rather than going to Hawaii, you go to Chicago. So you still fulfill your desire, but it's limited by what you deserve. In the same way, let's say at the end of your life, you're about to die, and your final desire is to fly. You've been a skydiver your entire life, so your desire is to fly. So you expect that in your next life you'll be, an angel flying around, all these things. But haven't been such a good person. You robbed a few banks, beat up a few people, and like this. So your karma is not so good. So your desire is still to fly, but rather than becoming an angel, in your next life you'll become like a pigeon. You'll be, flying around as a pigeon. So what you desire is limited by what you deserve. So high schoolers find these things very interesting. This is how the law of karma works. What goes around comes around. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Now, the same class, if I give to them like a Bhagavad Gita class, then they all fall asleep. So both in terms of the content, the presentation, how you do the kirtan, how you involve them, it has to be just right. And the first few times we did it, literally our t-shirt would be wet by the time we came back, because we were so nervous, we'd be sweating. But then it became part of us. And then we learned, okay, this is how you do it, this is the way to do it. So, Krishna consciousness means, Prabhupada in one place says, is finding where the potential is, and then capitalizing on that. So, at other high schools you may do it like this, and they will actually be more interested if you're younger than if you're older. Because they're used to older people always teaching them. It's the same boring thing. But if a younger person comes, it's something a bit new. And you can go with someone else who is also older, but also your speaking will be a big difference. And then at your own high school, you have to kind of see, you have to work around it and see what works best there in that situation. It might not be giving a class to them because they know you too well, but it might be going on a trip with them to Vrindavan, or inviting them to a retreat that's nearby at the temple, or finding various ways to engage them.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, just to further understand, when you reached out to other high schools. You said you reached out through the Department of World Religions.
Well, there will be some, you call the high school and you ask them who teaches world religions. So which faculty member teaches world religions?
Okay.
And then they'll give you the email or phone number of that faculty member. And then when you call them, then you say that, we're calling from, initially to get in, we would present India Hinduism, because that's a category.
Correct.
Hinduism is one of it. So we say we're from the Hindu temple, and we would like to come and would it be useful for you if we came and gave you a presentation, of our culture and our music? And initially you could start off by saying, well, we have a special program or something. Why are you offering this? Because we have something special. And then it's all about relationship. If they like you, then they'll call you each year. If they're friendly. And then part of it has to do with them. You may do a wonderful presentation, but if the professor is not favorably disposed, he may not call you. So only 1 out of 10 will continue. But once you find that contact, then they'll call you every year. So like one high school we would visit, Bishop Kelly, she would insist that we come to the high school. But another high school, this was Bora High School, that was a public school, every year, and this was not a world religions class, this was actually a sociology class. And it was about, other cultures. So it's not just world religion, but sometimes the most favorable person there might be the sociology teacher who's teaching about India or Indian culture. He would bring his class to the temple every year. And we would give the same presentation at the temple, but he wanted to bring his class to the temple so they have an experience of seeing the architecture, the artwork, and seeing the temple.
And these presentations would be combination. It starts with the kirtan,
yes.
And then do you use the audio visuals or just?
So the chanting is something that always makes them relax. So we'd always start with that kind of they're just like they enjoy it. So we'd explain a little bit, a few minutes about the chanting, and then we would do the chanting, and then after that we would have the class. And during that time, for a long time we never used PowerPoints. We would use the blackboard and we would write the different points. But now of course people are used to that, so you can also use PowerPoints. Sometimes PowerPoints can actually be less interactive. They can be less effective. You just have to see what works for your own style.
Okay. Very nice.
We would show them we would sometimes take the peacock feather for the younger children, the peacock fan, and we would pass it around the class. And just that way they engage looking at the peacock feathers in the fan. We would take the conch shell, we would grow a conch shell for them. Sometimes we would explain what the Vedanta is. We would spend a lot of time explaining the instruments. So things that would, because they won't remember so much anyway about the philosophy. So it's more about making a connection with them so that they know who we are and that they start coming to the temple.
Very nice. And then it would start typically with one small group of students, and then you said at some point you presented to the entire high school. So I just
wondered. Those were more special events. So if they're having an international day at the high school, then they have sometimes the whole auditorium. And then, they have different performances, the Native Americans come and do their drumming, and then here's a performance of India, then we would do the chanting, we would teach the whole gym, the Swami step, they stand up and do the Swami step, and they dance along and sing along. So in the name of culture, you can do anything.
Correct.
And then the more active it is, the more they enjoy it. So obviously the students won't dance, but if you teach them a dance step, then they'll enjoy it. They'll be part of it.
Very nice.
There were also these interfaith activities that we did, on Thanksgiving Day and Christmas Day, New Year's Eve. They have different people, representatives from different faiths. They come to one particular church and they give their presentations, and they're very short, 5 minutes long. We participated in that also. It was really nice experience because the children were able to get opportunity for reciting a shloka from the Bhagavad Gita and chanting, and they would love it. The crowd would love it, especially the chanting, and also the sound of the Sanskrit shloka.
So there must be an interfaith coalition here in Seattle where they invite different faiths to come and share their faiths. And so So we joined that coalition, and when they had their events, then again we would represent Hare Krishna or Hinduism, and the Christians would speak, the Muslims would speak, the Jews would speak, we would also speak. Because there's a lot of people interested in many religions, and this is how they learn initially about what Krishna consciousness is through these interfaith events. Yes. So yeah, that's very nice.
Thank you very much. We will end of the seminar. Thank you for your kind attention and your wonderful questions. This was very wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Krishna.
So I just want to hear from the audience. Did you like the seminar? So was it useful? Is there any take-home message from the last 2 days seminar? Okay. So I think Prabhu